Hello, I'm Sydney of Stuff Sydney Sells Quilt Co. and today I'm going to show you how to make my little raised mini quilt block. It's part of the Nursery Sampler, which is a collaboration with 9 designers, and we all design blocks inspired by early childhood. So mine is a sunshine block inspired by Your Miss Sunshine. It's called Little Raise, and it is foundation paper piece. So if you have never done foundation paper piecing, I'm going to walk you through every step of the way. It's a simple, very beginner friendly block, so you should be totally fine. There's a little bit of curve piecing, also very beginner friendly. I will walk you through it. Don't stress. Let's do it. So the first thing you're going to want to do is make sure that you have the pattern. If you don't have it already, you can purchase it from the link in the description. And once you have purchased the pattern, you're going to open up the PDF and then print the templates at 100% scale. So they will have a little 1-inch test square, and you're just going to want to get a ruler and measure that test square to ensure that it is in fact 1 inch by 1 inch. And that will ensure that your block is the correct size. And then once you have it measured, you're going to cut on the outside black line. You can see there's 2 outside lines, that is the seam allowance, so you don't want to cut the seam allowance off. You want to cut on that outside black line. Once you have it cut out, it will look something like this. Here are the things that you're going to see on the template. These bigger numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, those tell you the order that you're going to piece the block in. So you're going to start with 1, then 2, then 3, then 4. Pretty simple. And then down below them, it tells you what color you're going to use in each of the spots. So I have my colors already cut. There are cutting instructions in the pattern of what size to cut your shapes. This is a beginner FPP pattern, so I purposely made these pieces oversized to give you plenty of wiggle room. Okay, so let's get started. We are going to start with color 3 and color 5. Color 3 is this cute purple. Color 5 is this white. So on your foundation paper piece template, you are always going to sew with the printed side facing you. Now, the printed side is a mirror image of what the final block is going to look like. So you want the fabric's pretty side, the right side of the fabric, facing up on the back. So like this, that's the pretty side. If it's facing down, that's not going to be pretty. So we want the pretty side facing up. So I'm going to go ahead and lay that down on the back side of the template. You can see it's going to cover my number 1 area completely. I have at least a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around. That looks good. Okay, so we'll put that there. Now we need something to sew it to, so I'm going to get my this is my number 5 fabric. It goes in my number 2 spot. And I'm going to actually just align it with the edge of my purple fabric right there. So you can see once I sew my seam, it will open up. And if this had a right side and a wrong side, it would be the right side up. So you always do right sides together, just like in normal quilting. Okay, so I have those lined up. Now I'm going to adjust it a little bit on the front, just to make sure that that white covers that whole area of my number 2 space completely. So I can see that this is the line that I'm going to be sewing on because it's between 1 and 2. Those are my first 2 sections, so I'm going to be sewing on this line right here. So I'm going to put it about right there. You can see it's a little bit more than a 1/4 inch. I want to give myself plenty of space. And I just kind of have it like lined up straight with that line. So you can see it's parallel to that line approximately. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect. So I'm just going to take that and pin to hold it. Okay, I will meet you over at my sewing machine. I'm here at my sewing machine, and there are a few adjustments that I'm going to make before I start sewing. The first thing I want to do is lower my stitch length. I'm going to take it down to about 1.5. That's about where I like to be. You can go lower if you want. The reason we do this is that it makes it a lot easier to tear the papers out, creates more perforation, and it just makes your seam stronger. So that is a good thing. Just put on my standard foot that came with my machine, and I'm going to backstitch at the beginning and the ending of my seam, and I'm just going to sew directly on top of that line in between space 1 and space 2. And remember to backstitch. And sew down that line. And again, I'm going to sew across that seam allowance, that little gap space between the outside line and that little inner line. Just kind of continuing the line. You have to kind of just imagine it, but you just continue that line sewing like you would. Okay. So then I'm going to pull that out of my machine, and that is what it looks like. You can see my line goes right on top of that black stitched line. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold that paper, and then I'm going to trim my seam allowance. So let's go over to the cutting table, and I'm going to show you what that looks like. So to trim the seam allowance, we want it to be 1/4 inch. So I am going to take my ruler, I'm going to line this 1/4 inch dotted line up with the edge of my paper. Remember, it's folded. You want to make sure that you don't have this fabric like bunched up or anything. You don't want to cut that off. So make sure those are folded smooth on that side. That's smooth there. Then I'm going to go ahead and actually I'm going to turn it this way so that I am right-handed. Okay, and then I'm just going to trim that off. Okay, so that's what it looks like. You have a nice 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now I'm going to go over to my ironing station, and I am going to press that seam just like that. So open it up and press that seam just like that. When you press with foundation paper piecing, don't use steam. We don't want to get our paper wet. So nice hot dry iron, and go ahead and just press that seam. Okay, now we're going to head back to the cutting table. Okay, we're back at the cutting table. Now what I'm going to do is I want to just trim around the edges of the block and get all of this excess fabric out of my way. This is going to make it a lot easier to add our next section. So I'm just going to use my ruler and trim right along the edge of the paper. Make sure that the fabric you just pressed is in the spot that you pressed it to, because you don't want to trim off fabric in the spots where you want it. Okay. Okay, we're going to carefully trim around that curve. And then trim that. You can see what I meant, that the pieces that I gave you were really oversized. You have all of that left over. I would just throw this right into your scrap bin, and then you can use it for more FPP in the future with tiny pieces. Okay, so we've done section 1, we've done section 2. Now it's time to add section 3. Section 3 is color 1, which is my yellow, just like that. And so then when I sew on that line and I open it up, it will cover this whole 3 section. These pieces are big enough that you're going to have plenty of space. You can see that this one is a wider section, so you're going to want to be a little bit conservative on your 1/4 inch seam allowance. I wouldn't sew it, right there, because you're obviously not going to have enough when you fold it over. So I would do it, just eyeball about a 1/4 inch right there, and you can pin it if you'd like to. I'm going to take it over to my sewing machine and again start from the top, and I'm just going to sew all the way down that line between 2 and 3. So remember to backstitch at the beginning and the end. And okay, So that's what it looks like. Again, I'm going to fold on that stitching line that I just sewed between 2 and 3. I'm going to fold that over. And then I'm going to go over to my cutting table and I'm going to trim 1/4 inch away to get my seam allowance. So I'm lining my ruler up with that folded paper. Again, making sure that nothing that shouldn't be tucked in there is. That's all nice and folded over. I'm going to cut 1/4 inch away. Just like that. So then when I open that over, that's going to be just right. Nice dry iron, nice and hot. And I'm going to give it a nice press. Okay, so you can see that I covered that whole number 3 section. I have plenty of seam allowance even at that widest part, so that's great. Now I'm going to take it back over to my cutting table and I'm going to cut off this excess, and then we will add our final section for this piece. Okay, so again, I'm just going to trim even with the paper. So that's what it looks like. Looking great. That's what it looks like from the back. So now we have our final section. We're on section 4. We need color 5. Color 5 is another white. So I'm going to get my white. My white does not have a wrong or a right side. If it did though, I would want right sides together on the back. And I'm going to check from the front. And I want the wider area of the fabric on this side so that when I fold it over, it covers. So my seam allowance is going to be on this side of the line. So I'm going to line up about 1/4 inch. This section's really skinny, so on this one it's not as critical as it was on section 3 that was wider, that I'm as precise about 1/4 inch when I'm just eyeballing it, because this fabric is going to be ample to cover this little section. So now I'll take this over to my sewing machine and I'm going to sew on that line between 3 and 4 because we are connecting 3 and 4. I'm sewing on the line between 3 and 4, back stitching at the beginning and the end. Fold my paper, and then we'll trim our seam allowance just like before. So I'm trimming 1/4 inch away from my paper. I've made sure that there's nothing folded under that shouldn't be. And we'll trim that 1/4 inch away. Then we'll go ahead and press that one. You can see I've got good coverage there. It goes all the way to the edges on all the sides. So that will be great. Go ahead and press with a dry iron. Okay. That looks great. I'm going to go ahead and trim even with the edges of my block. Okay, so A2 is done and now it is ready to be joined with section A1. So you can see on the block this little arrow right here says A1 and this one says A2. So we're going to join those together just like so. So match up the edges of the paper. It's just like that all the way down, and then you're just going to sew on that line, and that will give you a nice 1/4 inch seam allowance. Make sure that your fabric is flat. Okay, so it'll look just like that. And at this point, you can go ahead and tear out the papers. Okay, all of my papers are out. I'm going to go ahead and press this seam now that I just sewed. I'm going to press it this direction because that's the direction all my other seams are going. And it's going to look good. You want to be really gentle when you press. We're pressing, not ironing, so that you don't warp your block. That's going to be especially important for when you sew that curve. At this point, I would probably hit it with a little bit of starch or pressing spray, just to give it a little bit of stiffness and durability and help prevent any warping. Okay, so there is your block. You're going to repeat these steps with quadrant B, quadrant C, quadrant D, and then meet me back here and I will show you how to add our little 1/4 circle into the corner. Once all of your quadrants A, B, C, and D are foundation paper pieced, I have sewn them together. I've removed the papers. They are ready for us to add our little curved pie piece. This is our 1/4 circle. I have cut them out using my 1/4 circle template that's included in the pattern. And here's what we're going to do. So you're going to take your 1/4 circle and you are going to fold it in half, matching up those edges there. So I'm just folding it in half, matching up the edges. And we are going to finger press along the curved edge right there in the center to just mark that center point really nicely. Now I'm going to take one of my blocks and I'm going to fold it in half, matching up my edges. And they should be exactly square because of the foundation paper piecing. It makes it nice and exact. And so I'm going to again finger press along the curve right in the center. So I have my edges matched up, the curve matches up all the way along, and I'm finger pressing right there. If it's hard for you to see that finger press crease, you could add a pin. You could mark it with a air erase marker, heat erase marker. It will be in the seam allowance. So however it's easiest for you, but I think that the finger pressing method works well for me. So after you have these finger press, I am going to place these right sides together, matching up that center point exactly. And it's really important to be gentle and not stretch anything because then your curves will not match up. Okay, so I have those center points. I want to match this corner up with this corner, and I want to match this corner up with this one, this side even with this side even with this side. Now, it's going to feel a little strange if you haven't done curves before because all of this is going to be full and be kind of bunchy and gathered up, and you're going to think there's no way that this is going to end up smooth. But the thing we're looking at is this edge right here. But you just got to trust the process. It's going to be okay. So you can see I've brought this edge up. It's even with this purple piece right here along the edge. I'm going to stick a pin to keep those edges together right there. Okay, so even there. Now I'm going to take this edge and I'm going to make it even with this edge on the opposite side. Go ahead and pin that. Okay, so you'll have something like this. I go ahead and just sew with these 3 pins in. If you are not comfortable with this, you've never sewn curves before, I would suggest adding a few more pins in. You want your edges to be aligned with your 2 pieces along this curved side. So you could add a pin right there, you could add a pin right there, just to make sure that everything holds nice and evenly and everything is good. Okay, let's head over to the sewing machine and I will show you how we sew this curve. Switching out my presser foot from the standard one that I had on there for the foundation paper piecing to my patchwork foot. It's got my 1/4 inch guide, so because we want to sew a true 1/4 inch seam on this one. Okay, I'm going to sew with my quarter circle on the bottom because that is the template I want to follow. This pieced edge has the potential to get a little bit more wonky and wild, and so I want to keep everything lined up with this edge. So I'm going to place that under my presser foot here. Make sure that that edge is still really nice and aligned there in the corner. Okay, so the name of the game is go slow and ease as you go, because we want there to be no puckers as we go. We just want things nice and flat and lined up along this edge. So you're keeping your eye on this edge, making sure there's no puckers going under your presser foot. Okay. So I like to tug if I have some fullness here. I like to pull from this area to kind of distribute the fullness. So I just pull a little bit down there and that kind of takes the fullness out. I still make sure I'm lined up here. My edges are both even along my presser foot, and I'm just going nice and slowly. Okay, so you can see here I've got this little area of fullness, so I'm just going to spread things out. I'm going to take this pin out and I'm going to give this a little tug down here, distribute that fullness, smooth it out. Okay, that looks good. I'm going to go ahead and keep going. Okay. I'm pulling this down a little bit to make sure that everything is still aligned with that curved edge. And I'm really careful to not stretch the top, my top foundation paper piece frame, because we want it to end up even. So be very gentle in any adjusting that you do because we don't want to stretch. Continuing onward. Okay, so this is what we're aiming for. We've got a nice straight even edge. Everything is lined up really well. I'm going to go ahead and press this stuff up toward my quarter circle. Very gently, we're pressing, not ironing. I'm going to hit it with a little bit of pressing spray just to make things nice and crisp. You can see on this one my edges are not perfectly aligned. I'm a little bit short on the side and a little bit too long on the side. If you're off by just a slight amount, it's not going to matter. If you're under 1/8 of an inch, I wouldn't bother fixing it. If you're more than 1/8 of an inch, then it's worth unpicking and trying again on your curve, because these are not trimmed because they're foundation paper pieced and the quarter circle is so small, there's not a lot of warping that is going to happen unless you're pulling and tugging. So just be careful as you're sewing your curve. Try to get those edges aligned as best you can. But again, if it's not perfect, it's not a big deal. I have my A and my B section with the quarter circle added. So now I'm going to sew those together. You can see there will be a seam in the middle of that ray. So you're just going to put them right sides together, and you'll want to make sure you match up the seam on that quarter circle so that your sunshine looks like a circle. So that looks good. And then you'll just sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance to attach those pieces. Do the same with C and D, and then I will meet you back here. Once it is sewn, that is what it will look like. So we have our nice half circle. Everything looks great. So I will do C and D now, and then we'll sew those pieces together and your block will be complete. Hooray! I have C and D sewn together, A and B sewn together. So I'm going to go ahead and join these two pieces together, right sides together once again. And I'm going to make sure that the edges of my circle match up. And then my block will be done. So here is our finished block. If you are on Instagram, please tag me at Stuff Sydney Sews so I can see your block.